everyone. Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we are tackling something that's actually a lot more interesting than it might seem at first glance. We're going to be talking about winterizing your herb garden.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you don't realize how much there is to know about it until you really start digging in.
Exactly, exactly. And we are so lucky to be joined by our expert who thankfully has done all that digging for us.
I'm happy to be here.
So we are turning to the wisdom of NC State Extension. They have this really fantastic guide on winterizing herb gardens.
Yeah, they're a great resource.
So, okay, you've got your rosemary, you've got your basil, your thyme, everything's looking amazing in the summer sun, but then those chilly winds start blowing. What's step one? Do we tuck them all in with tiny little blankets?
Oh, I wish. If only it were that simple. The first thing to keep in mind is that not all herbs are created equal when it comes to, handling the cold. I mean, think about it. Some herbs, like your rosemary, they're native to, sunny Mediterranean climates,
Yeah.
right? But then you've got others like chives that are way more comfortable in cooler regions.
Okay, that makes sense. So knowing where your herbs are from, like their native region, can actually give you some clues about how they'll handle winter.
Exactly.
That's a great tip.
It's all about understanding their preferences.
Okay, so the guide mentions this whole thing about annuals versus perennials, and I'll be honest, I mix those up sometimes.
Oh, yeah. No, it's a common gardening, kind of like a sticking point for a lot of people. Basically, annuals, like your basil, they live life in the fast lane. They sprout, they grow, they give you those delicious leaves, and then poof, they're gone after a year. Perennials, on the other hand, they're the ones that come back year after year. And actually, the NC State Extension Guide, it actually has this super helpful table that actually lists common herbs as either annual or perennial.
Oh, that is handy.
It's super useful, yeah.
So are you saying that we need different winterizing strategies depending on whether an herb is an annual or a perennial?
Exactly. Because annuals, they tend to be a bit more sensitive to the cold, so they often need a little extra help to make it through the winter. Some people even bring them indoors.
Wait, bring them inside the house?
Yeah.
I'm imagining my entire living room just turning into a jungle.
Uh-huh. Well, it doesn't have to be that extreme. You can take cuttings, snip off a stem, encourage it to grow roots in some water or soil, or you could just pot the whole plant and bring it inside. Imagine having fresh basil in the middle of winter for your pasta or whatever.
Okay, fresh basil in February does sound pretty tempting, but won't they get all leggy and sad looking inside? Especially without enough sunlight.
Yeah, that's definitely a concern. Light can be a bit of a challenge indoors, you're right. Some herbs might drop a few leaves, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a goner. Take, for example, lemon verbena. It's known to shed some leaves indoors. It's just kind of a diva like that.
Okay, good to know. So we've got some options for those more delicate herbs, but what about the tougher ones? How do we figure out which ones can handle the chill and which ones need some extra TLC?
Right, so that's where hardiness zones come in.
Hardiness zones. Okay.
Yeah, they might sound kind of intimidating, but they're actually super helpful. So North Carolina and lots of other places too, it's divided into these different zones. And each zone is based on how cold it typically gets in the winter.
So it's kind of like a map that tells you what plants can handle your local climate?
Exactly, exactly. And the NC State Guide actually walks you through finding your specific zone, which is super important because an herb that's considered hardy in one zone, it might, completely die in another.
Ah, okay. So even if an herb technically falls within a certain hardiness zone, a really bad winter could still do some damage, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Mother Nature, likes to keep us on our toes. But here's the cool thing. Even if an herb is looking a little rough after a harsh winter, it might not actually be dead. There's this trick where you can gently scrape, and I mean gently scrape the stem of the plant. If you see green underneath, there's still hope.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's like giving them a little health check.
Exactly.
I love that. So we talked about bringing some herbs inside, and we've talked about identifying the ones that can stay outside. But just leaving them out there in the cold seems a little harsh, even for the tough guys. What can we do to give those outdoor herbs a fighting chance?
One word?
Mulch.
Mulch, okay?
Think of it like a cozy blanket for your garden beds.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this magical mulch. What makes it so important for getting ready for winter? It's all about protection, really. So when the ground freezes and thaws, it can actually be really damaging to plant roots. And mulch, It acts as insulation, so it helps to regulate the soil temperature and prevent those drastic changes.
So it's not just about keeping things warm, it's more about keeping them consistent.
Yes, exactly. Consistency is key for happy plant roots, especially during the winter.
That makes so much sense. Now, are all mulches created equal? Or are there some that are better for winterizing than others?
That is a great question. The NC State Extension Guide, they recommend organic mulches like pine straw, cocoa bean hulls, hardwood bark, or even like a mix of bark and sawdust. And usually a good rule of thumb is a layer about 2 to 3 inches deep. But, some plants are just a little more high maintenance.
Oh, I know the type. The divas of the plant world. So which herbs need that VIP mulch treatment?
Rosemary.
Uh-huh.
Rosemary can be a little bit of a drama queen in the winter.
Oh, right, because it's used to those, like, mild Mediterranean winters, right?
Exactly. Mild, wet winters and dry summers, which is basically the opposite of a North Carolina winter.
Yeah, for sure.
So the guide recommends giving rosemary a good haircut after that first frost. Just cut it back a few inches above the ground and then pile on that mulch, like a thick layer, 4 to 5 inches deep. Really tuck it in.
Okay, rosemary gets the royal treatment, so mulch is crucial.
Got it.
But I'm guessing it's not the only thing we need to think about, right? What about, like, fertilizing? Should we be giving them, like, a boost before winter hits?
You'd think so, but actually the guide says to hold back on the fertilizer after, like, early August.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that?
It's kind of like, think about giving your herbs fertilizer, especially the kind that's high in nitrogen, is like giving them a shot of espresso.
Right.
They just want to grow, grow, grow. But if you do that late in the season, all that new growth, it doesn't have time to toughen up before it gets cold.
So they're kind of like going out in a blizzard in a t-shirt.
Exactly. It's all about timing.
Makes sense. Okay, so no late season feeding frenzy. What about pruning? Any tips on that for getting ready for the winter?
Yeah. So pruning is important, but again, timing is key. The guide recommends avoiding any major pruning after like early August. Similar to the fertilizer thing. Like you can do some light harvesting throughout, but if you really hack back the plant, you're just encouraging all this new tender growth that's vulnerable to frost.
Right, right. They're not going to have time to, like, recover before it gets cold.
Exactly. And they also mention being careful about like heavy pruning in the late fall, especially for those woodier herbs. Like your rosemary, their lavender, oregano, cutting them back too close to winter can actually delay their healing, which makes them more vulnerable to cold damage.
So we're just trying to, like, avoid any unnecessary stress right before winter.
Exactly.
Like, make sure they're not recovering from a cold when the big freeze hits.
Exactly. And speaking of things that can stress out your herbs, let's talk about drainage.
Oh, yeah, because soggy roots in the winter sound like a bad time.
The worst. Yeah, the guide really emphasizes how important well-drained soil is, especially for herbs that are native to drier climates. So rosemary, thyme, lavender, all those like sun-loving Mediterranean herbs.
Right.
The roots are just not used to being waterlogged, especially when it's cold.
Makes sense. So it's all about, like, trying to recreate their ideal environment as much as possible, even in the winter.
Exactly.
So what can you do if your soil is just naturally, like, on the heavier, wetter side?
Amending the soil with something like pine bark mulch can be really helpful because it creates more air pockets, which helps that water drain more easily. Or you could even consider planting in raised beds. Those are great because they naturally drain better than like ground level gardens, especially if you're working with heavy clay soil.
Ah, okay. Great tips. Great tips. Now, we talked about mulch, we talked about fertilizer, pruning, and drainage. Anything else we need to be thinking about as we head into the colder months?
It's funny. There's one more thing that's so easy to forget about in the winter. Watering.
Really?
I know, right?
Do you think they wouldn't need it as much?
Yeah.
It's cold, days are shorter. Why is watering still so important?
Well, it's easy to forget that even though it's cold, evergreen plants, which include some herbs, they're still losing water through their leaves.
Yeah.
Especially on those, like, sunny winter days.
Oh, right, right. So even though it might be chilly for us, it could still be drying out the soil.
Exactly. And remember how we were talking about stressed out plants being more vulnerable? A dry plant is a stressed out plant.
Right. And the last thing we want is for them to be stressed out when they're trying to, like, conserve their energy and make it through the winter.
Exactly. Exactly. So, you're not going to be watering as frequently as you did during the summer, but it's still important to keep an eye on that moisture level, especially if you're having a dry spell. And a good deep watering before a hard freeze is always a good idea.
Oh, like giving them a nice drink before they settle in for the winter.
Exactly.
I love it. I love all these analogies. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We went from like understanding what makes an herb hardy to mulch, fertilizer, pruning, drainage, even watering in the winter. Who knew there was so much to it?
Right. I mean, that's what makes this guide from NC State Extension so helpful. It's not just telling you what to do, it's explaining why.
Exactly. Exactly. And I feel like that's what makes these deep dives so interesting too. It's like we're not just memorizing steps, we're actually understanding like the how and the why, which makes us all better gardeners in the long run.
I completely agree.
Now, I know we're getting close to the end of our deep dive here. Was there anything else in the guide that really stood out to you as particularly interesting or maybe even surprising?
You know, there was one thing. It was just this little tidbit about lemon verbena that I thought was so interesting. It said that you can actually use microfoam for winter protection.
Microphone. Like
Yeah, like the packing material.
okay, interesting.
Yeah. It sounds kind of out there, but the guide actually mentioned it. Said it can really increase the survival rate. For lemon verbena, they said it can even be as high as like 95%.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, sometimes those unexpected solutions are the best ones. I love that we're picking up these little niche tips. So, as we wrap up our deep dive here, any final words of wisdom for our listeners who are, ready to go out there and winterize their herb gardens like pros?
Just remember, a little knowledge goes a long way. Just, by understanding your herbs, what they need, and following these basic guidelines, you're really setting yourself up for success. And who knows, maybe you'll even be enjoying fresh herbs all winter long.
I love it. So, we're giving you the tools to become herb whisperers. You can, understand what they need, anticipate their needs, and just help them thrive all year round. And hey, if you find any amazing winterizing hacks of your own, let us know. We love learning new things.
Absolutely. We're all on this gardening adventure together.
I love that. All right. Well, there you have it. Winterizing your herb garden straight from the experts at NC State Extension. Until next time, everyone, happy gardening.